battered derby, and his feet solidly planted on the good green earth. He was a tall, angular young Irishman who had celebrated his 20th birthday in the stinking hold of the Orion, which had floundered and almost gone down in the heavy seas off Cape Horn. At the height of the howling fury, Callahan had gripped the sides of his berth, calmly wondering if his beloved Tessa Glynn would die of a broken heart upon hearing of his death, or simply join the convent and pray for his soul until the Lord called her to his side. Beside him, Paddy Ryan had prayed even more fervently. Amid sounds of retching men and women, whimpering children, and the shrieking wind, Paddy had clutched his rosary beads and begged the Christ for his life and that of the others aboard the ship, especially the little children and their dear suffering mothers. The storm had passed, and exactly 6 months to the day that they had sailed out of New York Harbor, the Orion had wallowed into San Francisco. "Look at 'em down there," Michael said, pointing to the hundreds of ships that had been driven onto the beaches. "Did you ever see such a sight?" Paddy shook his head. He was shorter than Michael, with red hair, big splashy freckles, and a choir boy's innocent smile. "They just abandon those ships in the mud or in the bay, leave 'em to rot." "And the more's the pity, with all those poor devils stranded at Panama City. A man could make a fortune sailing back down there and charging $100 a passenger." Paddy shook his head. "Oh, it'd be blood money, and dead wrong to take advantage of them that's stuck in Panama with no passage." Michael supposed Paddy was right. From the deck of the Orion, he remembered the desperate Americans standing on the pier at Panama City, pleading to be rescued from that tropical, pestilent hell. The wrong of it was that they had been the ones willing to pay an extra $200 to make the Panama crossing, in the hope of arriving in California months earlier than those who journeyed by wagon train or sailed around Cape Horn. The scene he'd witnessed from the deck of the Orion had been so heartbreaking that Michael still could not shake the image of women and children on their knees, hands raised in supplication as they had begged for deliverance from Panama City. It had turned his heart to stone to hear the captain give the order to hoist sail on his already overburdened vessel for California, leaving those poor stranded souls. "If I could," Paddy said, "I would buy every seaworthy vessel in that harbor and deliver the Americans from Panama." "We haven't enough money to buy a spare gold pan," Michael said. "I said if I could." "If we had the money, we should have paid the $20 for a ride up the Sacramento River on the steamer," Michael said. "It'll take a day longer to walk. We could make that much difference in 1 hour at the goldfields." "But if we found no gold," Paddy argued, "then we'd have no money left for food." Michael was not ready to concede the argument. "This isn't Ireland during a potato famine. We would not starve. I would kill game." "With what? A rock?" "Then we could catch fish." But Paddy Ryan shook his head. "You heard the man down there at the wharf say that there are more miners in the Sierra streams than fish." Michael had heard that story, and more than once. He turned his gaze to the east. "Shall we go?" They could both see a steady stream of traffic moving out of San Francisco, following a heavily traveled road along the banks of the broad Sacramento to Sutter's Fort beside the American River. "Look at 'em, and more arriving every hour. They remind me of ants moving toward sugar," Paddy said. "We will have our share," Michael promised, "and it'll be sweeter when we sail back to New York Harbor, richer than pharaohs." "My sailing days are over, Michael. I could not survive Cape Horn a second time. As for the crossing at Panama, I would rather march through Hades." "Then how will we go home?" "If I do return," Paddy said, "I'll walk." And what about the wild Indians who would love to have your red hair on the tip of their lances?